Hey everyone, welcome to the Dirt Trail Running Podcast, the Coffee with Coaches edition. I'm Coach Loretta here with Coach Reese and Coach Jacob. And today's show I'm super excited about because it's also my passion. We're going to talk about getting loopy on a track, 24 hours. So we have Coach Jacob here with us, who also specializes in fast and flat. So sit back, grab your favorite beverage of choice, and let's talk about track.
Beautiful. Well, how are you guys doing this morning? I know we were just talking about runs. We were talking about preferred workouts. Jacob, you mentioned you did your least favorite workout today. Can you tell us what that is?
I did a 8x300 meter uphill, do them in about a minute with a jog back recovery. They have a special level of sickness to me, so take those workouts.
That's great because we have this conversation quite frequently on here. If you're running fast and flat, do you still need to do hills?
Yes.
What do you think
Yes.
the benefit is of hills with somebody that's going to be really, your goal is the 24 hours on the track? Why do you think hills are good?
A lot of it's leg strength, and I don't know who to attribute it to. I know it was a popular running coach that said it, but hills are speed work in disguise. It's a very true statement. Part of that is because it shortens the stride length. When you shorten the stride length, you naturally increase cadence. You also build strength. There are multiple reasons that hills benefit something like that. I actually like to mix it up. I did it today, but I'll generally run like a 10 to 12 by 300 meter uphill. And then there's a track about a mile from the Cooper River Bridge. If anyone's familiar with that, it's our steep bridge we've got in Charleston. And so track's about a mile from there, and then you can go back and do a 10 by 100 meter with 100-meter recovery on the track right after the hills. So that way you get your leg turnover going and really enhance your speed. But yeah, I hate the hill portion.
So love them or hate them, we still have to do them. I have a huge hill that's not very far from my house. And every time I think I am going to conquer this hill, I still have not. It's a really steep hill and it goes on, it seems like forever, but each time I'm like, I'm going to get better at this.
I was just telling Jacob, like the hills are one of my favorite workouts. Today I did 16 miles and just went up and down like this certain section of streets that we have that like go uphill and then it's a flat and then it's a downhill and then it's a flat. So getting around like 100 foot per mile, just nice and easy. You know, it wasn't like a workout, but I was like, man, you know what? Like I'm really excited for all these trail races I got coming up. So I'm just gonna like get some vert on the legs, and I love going uphill. So I think that's kind of interesting how like every ultra marathoner can find their niche in different aspects. And I think today's conversation, the niche of the 24-hour track race is going to be really interesting because we're talking with somebody or with two people who have plenty of experience. So I guess I kind of want to talk about first, like Coach Jacob, Coach Loretta, like why 24 hours? And if we want to expand on that, like why a track? What appeals about it? Where's the passion?
Jacob, you
Yeah.
go.
Me go?
I said you go first.
Well, why 24-hour? 24-hour is a really interesting one because when you really look at it, it's at the bottom of fitness. So it's kind of where when you run, fitness begins. If you run much slower than 24-hour pace, it's not that you don't get benefit. It's just that you start to go into a really low recovery mode, if not even lower. So getting to that right pace and seeing how high you can push everything above that so that what your 24-hour pace is a solid, easy general pace is really interesting to me. And then as far as why flat, I've always liked flat. You know, Zach Bitter helped me get into the sport, watching all of his stuff. I've seen all his stuff on 100-milers and back when he ran 11:40 at Desert Solstice and everything and set the American record then. And I learned that, yeah, mountains are great and all. No disrespect to mountain people, but if I really want to test my limits and see how fast I am, then the only place I can really do that is the flattest spot possible, with the fewest obstacles possible. So the place to do that is the track. And I think it was Bitter that I actually heard say at one point that on the track, you have no excuses. You can't say I tripped on a stump or I this, that, or the other. There are no excuses. You're on the flat spot. You have no obstacles, nothing in your way. So if you want to test your limits and you want to see what you can do mentally and physically, that's the place to do it. I like that challenge, so that's where I go.
I would have to agree. And it's funny, shout out to Zach Bitter, because that's really who got me interested too. Watching on the live stream at 6 days in the Dome and at Desert Solstice, there was something about it that just really drew me in. And I remember watching Desert Solstice and saying to my husband, I'm going to qualify for that race. I want to run that race someday. And I was pretty new to ultra at that time, but I was just like so drawn to it. And when I actually got to run it, I was just like elated because it was something that I really, really wanted to do. I don't know why, I've always loved the track. Like as a runner in high school, track was my favorite sport. Just loved being on it, loved the vibe of the track. And I think for me also, like once I've done some of these events, I love it because I love running solo, but I also love the feel of the track where we're with people all day long and we're with people of a variety of abilities going for a variety of goals, which is just so exciting to kind of watch that unfold through the day. And you're always constantly going around, and the camaraderie is pretty huge on the track as you're going by, whether they're going for a world record or an American record or just going for a PR, people are cheering you on all day long, and that's something that I think is really cool. And I think I said before on this show, that's how I met Jacob. I met him at Alexander County 24-hour. And I just remember his enthusiasm and kindness and his whole crew. It was probably Riley and all of the music in the middle of the track and signs. And it's just such a fun environment to be at. And that's probably what really draws me to the track. And I keep going back. Of course, I'm also a person that likes to always do better. And so in my head is, again, like Jacob said, there's like so few variables in a track versus doing another kind of ultra where you might encounter different kinds of elevation gains and different kinds of footing. The track is the track, right? That doesn't change. So I can compare myself each time I do it. Like, okay, can I do better? Because I know those variables are so limited. I mean, there's variables that come into play, of course, in every ultra, but it does minimize them.
That's interesting. And to speak on the camaraderie piece, I guess like most people's favorite part about an ultra marathon is the aid station. And I guess you're never really further than like a couple hundred meters from your aid station. So you're always in the party. Like I know Aravipa does some like 24 hours, and I'm just imagining like Jackass Junction, like at like less than 200 meters around where you're at. So I mean, I guess yeah, that's my favorite thing about races too. I've done a lot of looped courses, is that you get to see people, you get to cheer people on. People are always cheering you on. And sometimes when you're in like a point-to-point race or something like that, like there's definitely periods where you're like, yep, I'm alone and I'm going to be alone for a couple hours because I'm not going to see anybody, or, you're kind of in like no man's land or something like that. So that's interesting that you bring that up because I never really thought about that. But I guess my next question is, okay, so we want to test speed. That's great. But what about like the ultra distances on the track that really appeals to you? Because we can test speed with like 200s, 400s, 800 meters. What about that 24-hour distance gets you really fired up? Like, what do you learn about yourself in a 24-hour distance that you can't in a 5K?
That's a tough question because what you learn about yourself is different every time. It's never the same, right? So what got me into the 24-hour to begin with is I ran a race. It was the Allison Woods Halloween Hobble. It was on a 4-mile looped course. And I realized I did really good with it and I could compete. I ran 100K in like 90-degree weather and did it in 13 hours. And it was like a 16-mile loop with 4 or 5 miles worth of like knee-deep swamp. It's called the Hellhole 100. It's over here in Charleston. Absolutely awful race, but realized I was really good at it. And then I went and tried to do a qualifier at the Stinger, which, by the way, the Stinger is where we've kind of modeled our stuff for the Raven and the Midnight Drury as far as camaraderie, because it's probably the most amped up race that I've been to. People constantly cheering, all of that. But so yeah, that's a fantastic one to go to if you haven't. But I met Joe Fegis there, and he's kind of a legend in our sport. You know, he's done all of the 6 days. He started 6 days in the Dome way back when, and he ran 125 miles and I ran 122 and a half. And it was my first time going for 24 hours, and I was trying to do a US team qualifier, which I didn't even come close to. But I paced behind him almost all day, which I couldn't have had a better pacer. And so that helped me kind of get the feel for what am I doing for 24 hours. And one of the things he did to me that I've been able to do to other people is he put me 2.5 miles behind him. And guess where I stayed the entire race? 2.5, and I lost by 2.5 miles. I've since done that to other people, but so being able to figure out what you can and can't do and how to leverage competition, you learn different things about yourself every single time, whether it's I needed to do something different in training, or whether it's, wow, I really care about the people around me. It can be that simple, because believe it or not, the 24-hour pulls out more emotions in you than you would ever think, even for someone who's not very emotional. It's what it does. And you learn things about yourself through that process. You learn camaraderie, you learn competitiveness in a different way. And so, yeah, there are just so many different things, so many different angles that you learn different things about yourself. So
I love that. I didn't realize the similarity that we have in our starting. So my first ultra was, or actual race ultra was a 12-hour, and it was a loop, and it was 4 miles. It was on a apple, or through an apple orchard and through fields and through woods. And, you know, I loved it. I just thought it was great. And I set the course record with 68 miles. And so I'm like, was drawn to that. Like, I knew I was successful. And next up was Hennepin for me. And, you know, being able to do another fast flat course is something that, you know, drew me, because the course I first did wasn't flat. And I'm like, okay, if I can do this loop course like this, what can I do on flat? You know, so that was exciting for me. And then I also think, like, one of the things about the 24-hour on the track, or, you know, 24-hour, 48-hour, the 6 days, it's a very small niche of people that seem to be at the same events. So you get to know these people, and they become your friends because you see them at the events, right? They're all pretty much, you know, kind of following these events, right? To hopefully qualify for the USA 24-hour team. So that's cool. And then also there's so much strategy that unfolds on the track that you get to watch. You know, it was very interesting to me to watch different people like Bob Hearn, and he has a very strict strategy of run walk, and he's very successful with it. And he's, you know, set a lot of records. He's very data, you know, driven, which was really intriguing for me to watch. And just kind of seeing how that all plays out is really kind of fun to watch all day long, to see how that's all going to work. And, you know, the thing about the track is that you can get past multiple times, or you can pass multiple times on the track. And it kind of is maybe mesmerizing, right? And you kind of forget even where you're at on the track. You forget how many loops, even though every time you go by, you see a big sign that tells you your loop pace, and it tells you what position you're in. You still kind of just get lost in the moment, and you're just like kind of a machine and just running laps, I think. And there's something about that that's just really relaxing. I don't know. I think of nothing. I'm just doing loops.
And then you remember how much pain you're in.
Yes. And then you're like, why am I out here?
Yeah.
Well, I love that. Thank you for detailing all those to me. And you guys have actually convinced me to, you know, at least in my career, try a 24-hour event. I would love to track. Loop idea is super interesting. One event that so I'm wearing the Galena Sky race t-shirt from Ornery Mule. And that's an event that I really like to have a 4 and an 8 hour, but it's nice because you really get to test like your like strategy, because you're going by like the course is set, you know, the course, you're going to do it multiple times. So you get to try these things in training and during racing that you wouldn't otherwise be able to try if you have like 6 or 8 miles between aid stations, you know? So it's a great way to like kind of like eliminate some variables. So that way you can kind of play around with like, yeah, what does actually work versus what doesn't actually work. So you've convinced me. So let's say we have like an athlete.
Hold on. Jacob, could you put him down for 2025, the Raven?
The Raven.
Seal him in.
All right. I'll paper. Okay, so you've convinced me. I want to run a 24-hour track race. Now, let's say we have like an athlete that starts working with us at Ornery Mule Coaching. Let's say they're like, a female who's mid-30s. She's got a couple marathons under her belt. She can run like a 3:30 to a 4 hour and a 4:30 type of pace. So she's fairly experienced, but she's never done like an ultra before, and she wants to start dabbling in these longer distances. And she comes to you. She gives you about a year to say, hey, I want to do this 24-hour next year. Like, how do you guide that athlete? Like, what do you introduce to them? How do you start to work with somebody who, yes, has a little bit of experience in running, but doesn't have any experience in 24-hour races?
You want to go first on this one, Loretta?
Either way is fine. So for me, I think that training, depending on whatever race you're training for, whether it's a track ultra or whether it's an ultra running 100 miles, I think the training is pretty similar. We're thinking about time on feet and a strategy of how am I going to approach that. So some people are thinking about doing some run walk combinations, and that's something that we're going to practice in training. So for whatever race we're going to do, whether it's a mountain race or a point-to-point trail, rail trail or a track, we're always thinking about race specificity anyway, right? And so we're thinking about how that's going to be. With a track, we know there's no hills, so that's not going to guide us to walk when we need to walk, so we're going to have to think about that and how we're going to approach that. Is it going to mean that I, need to adapt a 3-to-1 run walk strategy, a 15-minute to 1 minute walk strategy, a 30-minute to 1? Is there something that I need to incorporate to figure out how I'm also going to build in my fueling? So those are the kinds of things I would start talking about. So they're starting to understand the fueling piece, the time on feet, and that piece of it more than really focusing on the track. Sure, getting some time on the track is nice because then you're starting to get a bit of a feel for it, but I don't think you have to overly train on the track to run a track 24-hour. And in fact, you wouldn't want to be putting too many miles, I don't think, on a track, because I think just a little of the curve and, just running on the track, if we were doing that all the time in training, we would probably set ourselves up for some injury. But having that experience is good just for a mindset, I think, to do that. But as far as building from the marathon up, I think, especially if you're just coming off a marathon, to me, it's a really great time to roll into an ultra training, right? So you're already, normally we come off of a marathon that we've trained hard for. We're probably in the fittest shape that we'll be, right? We've trained all of our aerobic systems for that race. Now we're going to roll into and we're going to start building that endurance piece to be ready for the 24-hour, which is, a ways out. So that's something that I guess those are some of the things I would be thinking about. How about you, Jacob?
Yeah. So generally when I look at, let's move from a marathon to a 24-hour event, I will look at one. I'm guessing your marathon was relatively flat, because normally when you try to approach a marathon, you want flat. What happens with that is generally when you move through a training block and you're training for something flat, you'll get flatter and flatter as you get closer to your race, which will mean that you lose a little bit of strength. So the first thing that I'll probably incorporate is going to be some sort of hills, some sort of strength type endurance work, whether that's like circuits on a track or whether that's just hill repeats or circuits on a hill, whatever it may be. That way we can rebuild that strength. And then I'm going to progressively work on building your intensity while maintaining a certain percentage of average race pace. So what you want is a goal for average race pace, that is. And I'm going to try and align that as a coach. I'm going to watch your heart rate averages and try and align that as best I can, because I want to set you up for success. And I know that it's very easy to go out too fast in a 24-hour or in a 100-miler. I've done it. I'm guessing Loretta and Reese have done it. All of us have, if we've raced very much. So I'm going to try and align heart rate and pace as best we can. Generally, we don't end up actually running to our full potential for a 24 hour. So we can adjust for that a little bit, but that's my job as a coach, right? You don't necessarily have to worry about that. So working on the strength piece and then building toward that. And like Loretta said, we're always aiming to be specific. So we can approach specificity from so many different angles. I've even done it with shoes. So
Good point.
in the beginning of a training block, I'll have something that's really low to the ground that has almost no cushion. And I'll transition more and more to something that I'll be racing in. Previously, I've raced in the Vaporfly. I can't use that shoe anymore because the way they changed the build, but I will start to run more and more in race shoe or shoes that are similar, that are way more cushioned than something really low to the ground. So even with shoes, with nutrition, we want to start to build that in the long runs. All of that, every detail that we can, we want to move as close to race as possible. That way we're really used to what we'll be doing in race and our body's prepared for it. Reading a book right now by Steve Magnus, Do Hard Things. Fantastic book. And he talks about how we took the military wrong. It's not just about training really hard. It's about preparing yourself for the obstacles you're going to face. And if you can prepare yourself for the obstacles you'll face, you will do really well when you face the obstacle. So that's kind of the goal in training.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think, you know, when we're thinking about somebody that's just coming off a marathon, they have no experience going any further than that, you know, nutrition, hydration become huge. So that's something I'm going to really focus on, because I feel like a marathon and under, you can get away with not knowing a lot about nutrition and finish, right? But once you hit over that marathon distance, your body, you really need to be thinking about fueling, and especially when you're going to that 24-hour distance. So being able to take time during your training early on, from, you know, when we start training and increasing that endurance piece, is really training your gut and being ready to be able to do that, and thinking about, how am I going to do this on race day? Am I going to be fueling and taking in every 15 minutes? Then I need to be practicing that same thing during my training runs, so I'm used to it. I think as far as the specificity you mentioned too is, you know, we need to spend some time on flat if we're going to be running flat, because we're going to be using those same muscles for 24 hours. It's not going to change. Now, typically in these track events, we rotate direction every 4 or 6 hours. What is it in the Raven? Is it 4 or 6?
It's 4.
Yeah. And so you are changing and using your muscles a little bit different when you're going back around, but you're on the inside lane. That's usually the requirement, is staying on the inside lane. So you're turning all day, you know, so your body needs to be used to flat and doing some of those things. Of course, I don't know what that person's training was like, you know, through the marathon. If they weren't already doing strength training, I would definitely want to be incorporating some strength training. A year out is a really good time to really focus on heavy strength. So we're really building a solid base, you know, kind of building the bricks, right? To make sure that we're strong and can withstand 24 hours of running, or, you know, however many miles that it may be. But, you know, starting out with that is going to give us a good base. And then moving into doing a lot of single legged work as well, because we're going to be spending a lot of time on one leg or the other during 24 hours. I mean, I think I looked up once and I was close to 200,000 steps in 100 miles. So think about that. You know, I was on one leg or another for a really long time. So we want to make sure people are strong and solid to be able to finish that whole 24 hours and come out healthy and be able to recover and, you know, move on to what they want to do next.
Loretta, I'm so at that, because actually this morning I woke up nice and early to redo some strength programs for some of my athletes, and it's shocking to me how many of us run and how many of us lift, but how terrible our single-legged balance is. A lot of people can't sit to stand from a chair without their knees flopping around like a fish, or without losing balance or putting their foot down. Like, I would challenge most people to say, like, hey, if you can't perform 10 sit to stands without putting down your foot that's not working, if you can't do that with control and ease and not flopping into the seat, or, like, you know, leaning out of the seat too hard, and kind of using momentum to get yourself up. Like, if you can't do that, like, we need to work on your single-legged balance. So all my athletes know how important it is for me to have a unilateral day in where we do some single-legged Bulgarian split squats, or we do some sort of balance. An athlete of mine right now has a balanced disc, and I have her doing static lunges where she's just holding and her front foot is on the disc. So that way her ankles have to control what's happening with the disc too. So huge shout out for balance and control, because it really doesn't take a lot, but can alter how your body likes to move. And if your body likes to move in a more efficient way, then boom, there's free speed, there's less injury risk, and there's faster finish times. Love it.
Yeah. And I love that too. And that's one of the things I love about our approach with coaching, where we start out with a virtual consult with our physical therapist, Dr. Lisa Elsey. It's really interesting for me to watch as new athletes come on and watch them go through a movement screen and see exactly what you said, Reese. People that have been running for a very long time. I was one of them. I have to admit, having terrible single leg balance. And, so I've really worked on that, which has improved. And there's so many factors that helps. Not only does it help your running, if you're having any issues with pelvic floor, having, strengthening so you're asymmetrical is going to help you as well. So there's just so many benefits of it. And just watching and then watching the growth to see the athletes as they develop that, how much stronger they'll be when they are ready to compete, let's say on a 24-hour on a track.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And one thing to kind of add to all of that too, we've mentioned how much should you train on a track and turns and things like that. And a lot of that single leg is going to be on a turn, and training on a track too much can definitely wreak havoc on the ankles, make your hips excessively tight, etc. And one of the things that I found works really well is find like a mile loop or a half-mile loop that has those turns so that you're still incorporating that strength component while you're running, but you're not doing it twice every 400 meters, right? Because twice every 400 meters adds up a lot when you're turning a full 180-degree turn, whereas you can turn 90 degrees on the corner of a mile loop every 4 turns. So something like that can help in training too, to make sure that while you're running in that single leg stance, you're still building ankle strength and hip strength and all of that while moving mechanically.
I like that. The other thing I like about training a little bit on some loops, and I often train on a loop that's just under 3 miles, but I like it because then I can kind of train my race day strategy and my mental strategy of maybe doing a 25-mile long run on that, where I'm going around, I'm using my car as aid, so I'm kind of getting that experience and doing that loop over and over. It's nice to have a little bit for mental prep too, I think of that mundane of that same loop over and over.
Yeah, and this is something that we talked about before too, and especially for Kettle or Galena coming up, or Earth Day coming up. When you do those loops, the motivation to call it oh, I'm fine, I don't need to finish the race, when your car is right there, when your friends are right there, all of the energy of the aid station is right there, and you're yeah, I don't need to race for another 2 hours, I'll just party, it's real for sure. So some of my favorite, and they're mentally brutal things to do to yourself, but from the doorstep, doing 7 or 8 or 9 or 10-mile loops, where it's boom, I do 10 miles, and 10 miles is long enough to make me say, okay, that was a good run. 10 miles is a long ways, but then it's oh, I'm gonna go out for that same loop another time, and it makes you think man, when I started this workout 2 hours ago, how long ago was that? It feels like forever ago, right? So now you're thinking, I got to start another loop. And by the time I get back from doing that second loop, it's still going to feel like forever and a half. It's going to feel like 2 forevers ago that I started my run. So I think those mind games are pretty important too. And you can do those from your doorstep, have some snacks on the front door, so you get right up to the point where you're about to open the door and go in, but you don't, you're so close to your warm bed and your warm comforts, but you don't go in and you choose the harder path. I think this is something that is super critical for Kettle coming up, and is why the 100K aid station is a prevalent drop, because you've gone a hell of a long way at that point. You've gone hours. For most people, you're going to be 10 to 15 hours deep, 10 to 16 hours deep. And you're yeah, it's a long ways. I'm good now. And to think, hey, I have another 18 miles out and 18 miles back to go. It can kind of play games with you up here. So the more with ourselves up here in training, the more prepared mentally we're going to be for these efforts. And I guess on the topic of mental training, okay, so this is a kind of a selfish question. So I do some track workouts. I love it because, again, you can take out all the variables. You can really track your performance, right? Like, how are my mile repeats like on this day compared to a mile repeat on, like 4 weeks down the road, right? So like you can kind of titrate the variables and really see your fitness improve based on what you're doing. But what I do with myself sometimes in training is if I'm on the track, I don't necessarily run in lane 1. I'll do all of my intervals in like lane 6 or 7 or 8. And the cool thing about Koros is that you can dictate like which lane you're running in, because I think the difference, and I could be wrong on this, but it is substantial. The difference between the inside tracks, so lane 1, that's 400 meters. And I believe lane 8, if you do a whole loop, it's like 420 meters or something like that. It's significantly more, bottom line. So what I'll do is I'll say like, okay, like I want to hold, week 1, I'll say I want to hold X pace in lane 1. And then week 2, I'll say, okay, I want to hold that same time, whatever it took me to get around loop 1. I want to be a little bit further out and then make it around in that same amount of time. So really I'm covering more distance, but I'm doing the same like one loop around the track, right? So then a couple weeks later, you get to lane 8 and you do the same thing. You make it the entire lane 8 all the way around. You're tacking on an extra 20 meters, but you're doing it in the same time. So mentally for me, it's kind of like, oh, cool. It's a nice, easy, like stepwise progression of like, I'm doing the exact same workout, but on the exact same track with the exact same loops, but they're slightly longer. So now when I go back to doing that same pace on just a 400 meter loop, I'm like, man, I got done with that so quick, Like, are there any workouts that you've done? And I know this is a long question, but to boil it down, are there any workouts that you've done like that where you play around with lanes that people are working in almost to callous their mind? So that way now when they're going around 400 meters, like they're like, oh yeah, like this feels really easy and it feels like I'm clipping them off quick,
Yeah, the only time I've used other lanes is if I'm doing like a long 30 miler on the track. I'll generally move out to like our track here at the Citadel has 6 lanes. So I wish I had 8 there, but I'll go out to lane 6. That way it's easier on the hips. But that's the only reason I've personally gone out into the further lanes is just to make it easier on the hips. And I'll normally try and split that halfway through to where I'll change directions to get the same benefit on both sides. But
okay,
that's
the stream of consciousness thing that I had where it's like, oh man, I want to ask like a track 24-hour professional, like if there's any particular mind games he uses with reps or distances or sets, So thanks for indulging me with that one.
now I do break down generally, and I'll try and rotate them every 2 weeks. So 1 week I'll do short intervals, and the next week I'll do short intervals. But the difference will be I'll do timed intervals the first week, and I'll do distance intervals the next week. And then I'll do timed intervals and then distance intervals and so on. That'll also be my hill day if I do hills, but I'm normally focusing on increasing VO2 max with those. So the timed intervals could be like 20 by 1 minute on, 1 minute recovery, plus 20 by 30 seconds on, 30 seconds recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And to build that, but the next week I might do like 30 by 400 meters on, 400 meter recovery. And so, yes, it's still equal, but it takes more time to do that 400 meter recovery, which means that I can speed up my 400 meters on.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I get back to my timed interval, I'll focus on making it so that I'm as close to equal as possible again in distance, but it's by time. So then my distance will be shorter.
Yeah.
So I did with it that way. Of those 1 minute on, 1 minute off is generally like a Balat interval for those that aren't aware. And what that does is most typically they'll be run at like 90% of VVO2 max pace, which is how fast you run when you hit your VO2 max. And then the recovery will be around 80%. So you'll average 85%, which is roughly half marathon pace. It's a great way to increase aerobic performance really fast, and you recover really fast from them. But that's
those are brutal, and I love those because, and a lot of people will call those over-unders. So you spend a little bit of time above lactate threshold, and then you spend a little bit of time just below lactate threshold. So that way, while you're running, you get this stimulus of like, okay, introduce a large quantity of hydrogen ion, which makes your muscles burn, and lactate. And then when you're backing off just underneath that lactate threshold. So your body has a little capability to start clearing things out and processing things. But when you hold that and you alternate back and forth, just above, just below, just above, just below, you get this really cool lactate clearance almost. So you're reading a book by Steve Magnus, and he describes this as like lactate tolerance versus lactate clearance. And what he likes to do is like teach the body how to clear the lactate and the hydrogen ion as best as it can. But then when you're closer to race day, just like teach the body how to like endure as much of it as you can. And the nice thing about setting parameters like you did about going 90% or 90% and 80% is that you're giving yourself this little wiggle room to go just a little bit harder, but by all means not too hard to the point where you can't then recover backwards during the off portions, which I think is like an amazing workout. It's really great. It's usually like you can program like anywhere from like 20 to 40 minutes of this type of work, and like it's a solid way to feel like, man, like I got something accomplished today. And you can really work it in anywhere along your program, just because it is one of those mentally challenging workouts, but it's not going to absolutely fry you. It's not like doing a bunch of VO2 max or doing like a super duper long run or something like that.
Well, so unless you use tons of them, it's weird because you'll feel like during the workout, dear goodness, this is one of the hardest workouts I've ever done. But then done with the workout, it's like 5 minutes later, you're walking to your car and you feel fresh. It's not like beats you up really bad. And you were mentioning Magnus. So with that lactate clearance and everything, there's also what's called lactate shuttle. And I don't know if Magnus, is that out of the science of running? I don't know if he talks about lactate shuttle there, but it's pulled from Renato Canova, one of the top marathon coaches. And one of his most famous workouts is 1K on, 1K off. So a lot of the time that's what I'll try to build to. And you can average different paces for those. You can play around with all of that. But what you're looking at is how can my muscle fibers utilize lactate for fuel so that I can shuttle this effectively and get that nice back and forth while also building a lot of training load so that I can basically run really fast for a really long time, to put it simply.
So I have a question. So we're talking about this, and a lot of times we're thinking about it in the perspective of running something pretty fast, right? Jacob, I think your PR is like 155 miles in 24 hours. But let's take it and look at it a little differently. What if I'm somebody that's middle-aged, I'm mid to back of pack? Why do I want to do this kind of work? What is that value for me?
Yeah, so a lot of the time, the analogy I'll generally use is if I can't squat 100 pounds once, why do I think I can squat 95 pounds 5 times? It doesn't make any sense at all. And we have to be able to, if we equate that to running, we have to be able to utilize a certain amount of oxygen at a certain level before we can use it more at a slightly lower level. So, believe it's Philip Skiba. He's one of the guys that worked with the Breaking 2 project and everything. He talks about how running fitness is like a house. So if you think of a roof being like the top of your fitness, we want to raise that roof as high as possible so that then we can raise the ceiling as high as possible to that. And we can raise, right? So the levels keep going up. And we want to make it so that what we can achieve is as high as possible. So if we just keep running easy all the time and we stay on the floor, great, we'll stay on the floor. But if we want to make it so that floor is higher, then we have to raise everything. We can't just raise the floor. We have to raise everything simultaneously.
That's beautiful. We all want vaulted ceilings because if our bodies are capable of producing like more power and a faster velocity or a faster speed, then that easy is going to feel even easier. And then a couple of months down the road, now all of a sudden you're running the same easy intensity, but it's 30 seconds a mile faster, So it's like, if you do some of that like harder work, which it doesn't take a lot, like it's not like you're running all of your workouts that hard. It's just, you put a couple key workouts here and there that are upper end that, like might be a little bit more challenging for an athlete where they're working intensities and speeds that they're not used to using, you can see such great gain. And then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, naturally, I just want to run faster. I mean, this happened with my girlfriend when we were training for Chicago Marathon, is I was like, slow down on your runs, slow down. And she goes, it just felt great. I couldn't stop. My breathing was cool. Like it just felt natural to go a little faster. And I think that's kind of like, as you work with a coach, that's what you should see is like, I'm working with somebody right now who's like, just kind of like, he's like, oh yeah, like I PR'd this. And he just says it like kind of conversationally. And I'm like, that's freaking awesome. Like, how did that feel? Like, oh man, I think I could have gave it a little bit more gas, and it's like, awesome, you PR'd and it was, that's sweet. But back to your analogy, if you can't squat 100 pounds once, what makes you think you can squat 95 pounds 5 times? It's the same thing as like, let's say you run a half marathon and you do it in an hour 30, like you can't then say, like I'm capable of a 3-hour marathon, because by definition, like if you ran that half marathon as hard as you possibly could have, and it took you an hour and a half, what makes you think you can go as hard as you possibly could for an hour and a half and then double that? It's contraindicating itself. You can't run as hard as you can for an hour and a half 2 times in a row, so it's kind of the same thing where it's like, let's make your top end a lot more capable, so that way like your bottom end comes up a little bit. And I love that. And it's something that we talk about all the time here on the podcast for sure.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely like getting comfortable with being uncomfortable too. I think it pushes that piece too. I think I have a lot of runners that come in that are used to just running slow all the time, just like this easy, slow pace. And then they have to get used to being a little bit uncomfortable. Like it sounds like Deanna did. And then next thing you know, you start running faster because now you're used to being out of comfortable and into that uncomfortable. And then you can maintain that faster pace with a lower heart rate. All those factors come into play as you're starting to work all of those different energy systems.
Well, and now let's say we're into base season, right? So you get all this fitness in the summer of 2022, you increase your easy run pace, you enter base season or transition season this time of year. Now all of your same RPE runs, RPE of 5, RPE of 4, like those just become faster. So now all of that base that you build up for the winter season, naturally, without being harder, is just faster. And then you see those gains really compound year over year over year, because now you look at yourself and you say, oh, in 22, I was running 10 minutes a mile and it was like an RPE of 5. And then, 2021, it was like, okay, cool. Like I'm running 9:30 minute a mile. It's the same RPE, but I'm getting a little bit faster. And you just stack that year over year until all of a sudden you're like, dude, I'm running 7:30s and like this feels like nothing. Like my heart rate's super chill. Like I feel great. And now I'm doing my workouts a little bit harder too. So now you have all of these hundreds of miles, all of this consistency being consistently a little bit faster, but consistently still easy. And that's where the endurance sports, and that's why patience is key.
Yeah, and one thing that like Renato Canova is, back to him, one thing that he said too is when he has even an elite athlete come to him, so probably thousands of miles under his belt, then the first thing he looks for, if the athlete is saying, I've reached this plateau and I just can't break through it, is the first thing he does is looks for what the athlete isn't doing in training. And that's what he starts to focus on. So a lot of the time that's easy running. When I get people, they're not running easy enough. So they think they are, because they're doing lots of miles and they're doing it all at that consistent pace, but that's not doing a lot to increase performance. If we slow that down a little bit and we add in more speed work, then we can still average what we want to target in race. So like I was just looking at my data for when I ran Canal Corridor, I ran 12:42, and when I ran the Stinger, did 1:59. I was looking at my data for that and what I did in training, and I averaged in training the same heart rate. This is 4.5 weeks before, the same heart rate that I averaged in race, and I averaged same thing for Canal Corridor. It's a 6% difference. It's not a lot, but I averaged the same in training as I did in race. So we generally want to try and target what are you going to be averaging in race, unless you're getting into like marathon territory. It's just way too fast to do that. But for ultras, generally, we can target whatever heart rate you're going to be running in race. We can target that as your average percentage. So even when we're talking about adding in faster stuff, it's not like we're saying this is going to be really hard training, but more so that we're going to add in some stuff and we're going to make other stuff easier so that you average 24-hour heart rate, right?
I love that. You know, just kind of sprinkling in a little bit of spicy, but the rest of it is going to be easy, low heart rate, low effort, going out there. I like to say just going out there and moving your legs. Coach Reese likes to say collecting heartbeats, you know, whatever you want to say is just that nice and easy pace. And I think you're right. I think you nailed it, Jacob. So many people to come in and the first thing I look at is that easy pace and where their heart rate and their effort is. And that's usually a good place to start because a lot of people get used to what they think is easy and it's not quite as easy as it could be.
Yeah. I'm only laughing right now because like Loretta said, you hit it so hard on the nail on the head. Like we get people who are like, oh man, like I'm already doing like all this running. Like how could I possibly like add intensity onto it? And then it's like, well, you're going to add that intensity, but overall your plan's going to like week to week is going to feel like it's easier because we're going to scale back all those like, you know, I don't like to say junk miles, but all those miles that just kind of fill in your weekly mileage, we're going to scale that down. So it's so easy that you get back from your run like, that was a great warm up for the day. You know what I mean? And that's what it should be. Like we shouldn't always feel destroyed after our runs. Like, you know, for like, you know, like the higher end, you know, athletes, it's like maybe we're running like 1 to 2 like hard workouts a week where it's like, okay, you should wake up and like look at your paces and know that you can do them, but kind of just be a little bit intimidated. Like, okay, like I know I got this, I can do this, but it's going to require a good amount of effort, you know? But then when you think about your week as a whole, it's like, oh yeah, I had like 1 or 2 like, you know, harder days, but like everything else is just super chill. So it feels easy. Then when you just kind of do that like middle, middle intensity all the time, if all of your runs are like 7s or 8s, you get to the end of the week and you're like, God, like I'm cash, you know, but you never really went hard enough to get better. And you also never went easy enough to recover. So you just stack week over week over week over week of this fatigue that you just kind of like end up like digging yourself into a hole. And then you're like, dude, like I'm not going to be able to do a VO2 max workout. I'm not going to be able to do like, you know, and it's like that, you know?
Yeah. So I feel like we've really hit like on the training piece and kind of talking about that. So let's go back to the track a little bit. And Jacob, can you describe like what's it look like on the track? You know, some people haven't done 24 hours, haven't been on a track to see what's happening. What's it look like as far as aid station and support and how do you approach that as far as your fueling? Are you using a hydration pack? Are you using a handheld? Are you just grabbing a cup in an aid station? Talk to us about that a little.
Yeah. So actually what I carry, believe it or not, I've used 3.4 ounce shampoo bottles because there are ones that have the little spray thing so that you have to actually squeeze the bottle to make it spray out. So you can get them on Amazon pretty cheap, but I found those work perfect because they're very small, very light. You can put the exact amount of fluid, so it's already measured. But anyway, so the way the track is normally set up is different track races will be different. The way we've got it at the Raven is we have tents set up alongside the one side of the track. Desert Solstice, for instance, moves them in. We're not able to because of the track surface. They just resurfaced it not long ago, so it's a nice springy, spongy track still. So we can't put tents on it, but we put those down the concrete. You can walk out to hand people aid and things. Not past lane 3 though. That way we don't have any mix-ups or anything like that. And generally, so it's a pro and a con. You see your crew every lap, whether that's every 2 minutes or every 3, 4, 5 minutes. You see them every lap. You can't get away from them. So it's important to have good crew that is there to cheer you on and not let you sit down. Right. That's the hardest parts, especially if there's a heater. So if there's a heater, that's very tempting when you feel that heat and you're in a 45-degree weather, it's cold and all of that. But you're able to set up, we have tables, tents set up already. So you can put all of your aid there generally. they'll hand off and right after that lane 3. The way I'm very specific with my fueling. So for me, it's roughly every 7 minutes and I'm handed something. I love those 3.5 ounce shampoo bottles because they work perfect. I'll generally alternate a sugar drink and an electrolyte drink. I like to split them. I think that's really important. One, typically when you take in a lot of something in a 24-hour, you tend to get tired of it. So if I can cut that in half, I'm probably going to do better with it. 2, one thing that I found is anytime you have problems, you can fix a carbohydrate problem, but you cannot fix an electrolyte problem quickly. If you need to take a handful of M&Ms, it will spike your blood sugar very quickly, or a Mountain Dew, or whatever it is. But if you get your sodium levels down and you get your potassium levels down, or magnesium, or whatever it is, you may end up having cramps, all of that type of stuff. You can't fix that quickly unless you get an injection, which you're not allowed to do. So making sure that that is always on point is important. And it's why I split electrolyte from carb, because then if I start to get full from taking in too many calories, I can drop my carbs. There go my calories. Now I'm just taking electrolytes. So I can make sure that I don't end up in an electrolyte problem, but I do still take in carbohydrates as long as I can.
I love it. I love it, Jacob. I'm very much the same. I like to split it up because then I can control the variables. If it's all together and I'm doing the same thing all day, I can't. So like if my electrolytes are going off or it's my carbs, then I can increase one or the other. But when it's all together, I can't make that manipulation, and then I get into trouble. And I've learned that the hard way. Reese saw me learn that the hard way at 6 Days in the Dome one year. So back to the drawing board. And so
if you've ever problem with it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't had a problem with it yet, you will one day, and then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep, absolutely. For sure.
Jacob, so stop roughly like 7.5 minutes. How do you figure out, how did you figure that out for you, and how do you help other people figure that out? Because I feel like, depending on how fast you're going, like you're going to see your crew at different times. So do you do it by like lap? Do you stop after a certain amount of time? Do you just wait for your crew to hand something out to you?
So I do have a full spreadsheet for my crew. It's got tons of calculations built into it on, what heart rate am I running at and what pace and what blah, blah, blah. But generally I'll look at the baseline, 100 calories a mile. So how are we going to get in what we need for 100 calories a mile? Some people are different. It could be 90, it could be 110. Generally 100 is a pretty good baseline. So if you're going to be running 150 miles, then you're going to need roughly 15,000 calories to get you through. Did I do my math right in my head?
I think so.
Anyway, so making sure that we get the calories, that's baseline. The electrolyte I've pulled from different research studies and things as far as, what do I need to replace? One of the things I've done too is Gatorade makes electrolyte patches that'll tell you how much sodium you're sweating out. So you can go to, I think I got mine from Dick's Sporting Goods. You put a little patch on the inside of your arm and it's pretty cool. It'll fill up the little lines in orange as you run. It's filling it up with your sweat, but it's changing its color as it goes. And it'll tell you how much you sweated out, and you input, this was my run. It has it where you can import the run too, I think, in their app. So it'll go by like temperature and all of that. When you do that, you want to go by a similar temperature to what you'll be racing in. So if off day is Saturday, so I'll be able to put in a long run. It'll be colder in the morning than it'll be in the race, but it'll be about race temperature during the day. Then I would suggest going during the day when it's race temperature and put on the patch, go for your long run, and see how much sodium you sweat out in that temperature in that amount of time. And then you're able to use that as your baseline for electrolytes. I found that's really helpful. So I've also looked at some different things on, there's a good article, I forget where it is, but it's what they did in Albi, France. It pulled, I think, 60 of the runners from the 24-hour, and they had all of their consumption. So you're able to look at averages like that and everything, and go by that type of thing.
Nice. I've done something similar. So I used precision hydration. I went and I had my sodium levels tested. So the amount of sodium that you lose basically is the same amount you lose your whole life once you learn how much you lose per liter of your sweat. It just changes, the variable changes is how much you're sweating is going to tell you how much you're going to need per hour for your sodium replacement. So I do think that that's super helpful too, to know those numbers if you can. So there's different ways to get that and be able to stay up on it. And so then I know exactly where I need to be, every hour. And I use also sometimes things called H drop that will also do a quick check of that. I like to do that occasionally, just like random checks, because like Jacob said, depending on what the temperature is going to be that day, and you can do checks throughout the year to kind of see where you're going to need to be for different events that you might be doing or long runs that you're doing. So you have an idea of how much sweat you're probably going to be losing and then how much replacement that you need. And like Jacob said, if you get into a deficit, it's really hard to dig yourself out.
And they're not super expensive either. I think the Gatorade ones are like $20 for a pack of 2. So $10 each to get a good sweat check to make sure. In my experience, I've found that if I take in a lot of sodium, I'll sweat saltier than I do if I haven't been doing as much sodium too. So a lot of the time, what I like to do is take my electrolyte drink before I go for my run and do my, that way I make sure this is going to be as similar to race conditions as I can get, and I'll be able to get a good gauge that way.
Nice. So,
Beautiful.
there's nutrition and hydration, all that piece comes into big play when we're doing 24 hours. So I think we've kind of wrapped up everything about a 24-hour, but I want to talk a little bit about 2 really important things. Some new news came out from the USA 24-hour team, and there's some new standards. Do you want to talk about those a little bit? Have you seen the new standards? Yeah.
Yeah. So I forget what's the women's again?
125 miles.
And they put the men's at 140.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly why the change. I think that they might have done it to help increase the amount of people who aim for a qualifier, which I think is fantastic.
Right.
140 there are 1,440 minutes in 24-hour period. So for a 10-minute mile, you're looking at 144. So you're now able to run in the 11-minute mile range and get a qualifier, which I think is great. I hope it pulls more people in this.
Right. That's kind of what I was thinking. Maybe the mindset was too. So that's kind of cool. So starting this year, 125 miles in 24 hours for women and 140 miles in 24 hours for men. So then that brings us to your big event that's coming up in February. Let's talk about the Raven.
Yeah, I'm very excited for the Raven. We just had one drop yesterday, actually, that won't be running with us, but we have I think 20 in right now, and at least 16 of those, if I remember right, are aiming for US team qualifiers. So it's going to be a fantastic race. I think that we'll see quite a few over the 125 or the 140 mark. I know Micah Morgan is definitely capable. I'll be running, and Bob Hearn will be going for it, Greg Armstrong. Bob Hearn and Greg have both been over 150 multiple times. So I'm excited to see what they crank out. We've got a lot of good, solid runners in there.
Yeah, it's going to be a great day. So tell us a little bit about where it's at and about your track setting.
Yeah, so it's in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. It's, most people would know the area as Charleston. So one of the most historic places in the U.S. We are on a newly resurfaced track. I guess it's probably 2 years now, but I just ran on it this morning. It's still as bouncy as it was. So I'm excited for that. It's half shaded, so trees loop halfway around the track, which I searched all through the South Carolina and North Carolina areas to see, where can we get a good spot where you're not going to have tons of sun. And even across the US, there aren't a lot of places that are shaded. So there was no better spot. It's an expensive spot to be at, but I think it's well worth it because we've got the stands there so people can sit and watch. We have a full aid station with awning and picnic tables and everything, where we have aid set up. Timing uses the top of the stands. There's a little like desk spot up there. So that's where he sets up. You can see the whole track from up there and everything. So that's great. The weather, as of now, I can actually probably look and see what the most recent, it shows 64 and 49 as a high and low. So I think it'll probably be a little cooler. I think it might be 45 to 55. I'm not sure though. That can change very quickly, but 45 to 55 would be fantastic. It might be a little cool in the shade actually, since we're half shaded. But yeah, we set it up to where it would be a perfect spot. We didn't settle for any other track because we wanted the good surface. We wanted the shade. We wanted everything that it comes with. We have full showers and everything that we're able to use in a gym, and concession stand, all of that. So we've got everything set up for the athletes to be able to do what they need to do and take as much stress off of themselves as we can. That includes, tables and tents and all of that. So we want to make it as easy as possible for everybody. And that's our goal. And we want to see as many qualifiers as possible or records. So
nice. I'm excited. So I'll admit I'm hoping to be able to run the Raven. I've been struggling, as we've talked about many times, with niggles all year, but I'm hoping to be able to very soon say I can. So I'm hoping to be able to be there and on the track. Last year you had a great event. I believe Camille Herron set was it an American age group record on the track last year?
I think she ran 12:52 and some change, if I remember correctly. Set American and World's Masters records.
Nice. So let's talk about that a little bit. So it's a 24-hour event, but you can go for records of different distances, right?
Yeah. So we do have multiple USATF officials who will be there. So we are able to give splits as needed. I do ask that all runners make sure they let me know if they are going for anything in particular. That way we can make sure we're lined up, especially if it's a world record. Drug testing and stuff like that is super important. If that is missed, you don't get your record. And that's a lot of effort to not get a record. So we do ask for those things, but we work on getting all of that set up for the runners as well.
Nice. So talk a little bit about that. I have been at events where the American or world records have been set and drug testing was done immediately after. Can you talk about that protocol a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually wasn't involved a lot with that with Camille because her and Connor set that up. Okay. But it actually took quite a while. I remember Camille, it was probably an hour or an hour and a half that she was off doing all the drug testing stuff and everything. And then we worked on record submissions and all of that. They give you a letter that you then have to submit with your record submission and everything. So we got all of that submitted, but it is a process. It's not a short thing, at least not in my experience. So yeah.
Yeah, I was at the jackpot, and it was the USA championships when Camille was first place, and I think she had a record, and so she had to have testing, and then Arlen Glick was second, and they were testing him as well. And it's kind of interesting because they're very much watching the runners as soon as they're finished and waiting for that. And I remember Arlen was pretty dehydrated, and it was not moving too well, to be able to go and actually do the testing. So it is pretty intense, really, that they're watching that. So yeah. Well, that's exciting. So any other shout outs you want to do for your race?
Shout out to the Foot Store. They are our main sponsor. Best place to go in the Charleston area if you're looking for having your feet comfortable. I've found great success with them personally. I've been going there for probably 5 years now. Carolyn is a wealth of knowledge, and everyone that she's trained there is absolutely phenomenal. She worked in PT for multiple years, and I've had some different issues that she's helped me work through and things like that. So absolutely awesome place to go. Ornery Mule has been very supportive of us. We're very thankful for you guys. And we're hoping to get some other sponsors on board. Noah Moore Realty is one of our sponsors. So he is a local realtor in Charleston. So if you're looking at purchasing anywhere in the Charleston area, he's a very good guy. We've known Noah. He puts on Peyton's Wild and Wacky 50K, which is you run consecutive 5Ks, 10 of them. And he also puts on the Charleston 100, which is where Chris Varnado, one of our entrants for the Raven, just ran a 15:30 100 miler. So he'll be looking, I think, for a qualifier. I'm working with him.
So you're also coaching him. Yeah.
I'm coaching him through the Raven. So I'm really excited. He's a very strong runner. So yeah, those are my few plugs.
Nice. And of course, your wonderful wife, Riley, is helping. And do you want to talk a little bit about the autism piece?
Yes. So Low Country Autism is a organization here in Charleston that also does an event called Parents Night Out. And for the Midnight Dreary, we were able to fund a Parents Night Out completely, which was absolutely awesome. And that's where basically you have autistic kids who are watched so that parents can go and do their thing for an evening. So it's an absolutely awesome thing that they're doing in the Charleston area. They're helping autistic kids, which is really important. You know, those kids are typically more neglected, even as they get older a lot of the time. And a lot of people don't recognize that there's a need there.
Right.
So having organizations that specifically help that need is really important. And it's our job as race directors to put them out there and aim for helping them succeed. So we do 10% of profit to Low Country Autism. That way we can help fund their Parents Night Out, which hopefully we'll fund another one from this. The Raven is one that we don't make like any money on. If anything, we probably lose, but I've heard similar things for like Desert Solstice and things like that, though. They're difficult ones to put on because you have a limited field and all of that. But the Midnight Dreary, we definitely are able to do a lot more. So we enjoy supporting them throughout the year.
Right. And I love that. It's really great to be able to give parents respite for the children with autism. I think that that's really great. And then I also think you also contribute to the USA 24-hour team as well.
Yeah, we did last year. I don't know how we'll be able to do with that this year. We're still looking at that because, of course, we are working with Low Country Autism, and budget is really tight this year. Last year, we opened it up to everybody, so it was more of an all-comers. We had, I think, 31 people in total out on the track. So that makes a big difference with budget compared to, I think we have 20, because we have let some people in. You probably saw Don Winkley is in. So he's a very well-known one in our sport. We weren't able to let in everybody that wanted in, but we did let in a few. And so, yeah, but it's a lot different this year than it was last year. So we're looking at that. We hope to be able to do something, but we don't know what that will be yet, if anything. We're trying.
That's fair. So let's talk about that a little bit before we wrap up. So you have an all-comers race, which is the Midnight Dreary that took place in October. So anyone who wants to run a 24-hour on the track, doesn't matter their pace, their time, anyone can come to that one. Where the Raven that's in February is more geared towards an elite track invitational. So you have some standards. Are you still taking applicants for the standards, and where can we find your standards?
Yeah, so everything's going through Ultra Sign Up now on that. So we now have it set where you input your best race performance / time, So we're able to look at that and determine whether or not we can get you in. That's where you can find that. Midnight Dreary is all comers. It's a great spot. So there are many elite runners that don't meet our standards. And the reason for that is age group records, right? So I anticipate the Midnight Dreary being a very good location for masters records and other age group records, because like Larry Stevens, he ran 120 and some change. He's 67 years old. So, I mean, it was amazing watching him run all day, but it's a great location. It's a great spot, even though it was warm that day. I think we reached up to like 76 degrees or something crazy. So, which is warm for us, but yeah, it's a great spot for that. And the winner of Midnight Dreary gets auto entry into the Raven. So
Okay. That's exciting. All right, now I'm just gonna have to ask one last thing. Why the names Midnight Dreary and the Raven?
Well, when we did the Raven, when we were thinking about our second one, I liked the Raven. It was fun and all of that. And then we decided to add another one. And when I was making the logo and everything, thinking through, what I could do, I thought I could have a bird flying in on a lamppost, which the Raven itself is a bird sitting on a post. And basically the idea is we decided to keep with the Poe theme. Once Upon a Midnight Dreary is the first line of the Raven, probably his most popular poem. And the idea is the Raven is kind of flying in, and then for the Raven, he's sitting on his post. So it kind of goes together. That was kind of the thought of it. We thought we'd be a little creative and go that route. Edgar Allan Poe, he actually lived in Charleston for a while as well. I think it's Annabelle Lee is the name of a story that was about a girl that he was dating while he was here, and all of that stuff. But there's Poe's Tavern over here, which we had sponsor the Midnight Dreary. It was perfect. They had someone read Poe poems and everything while runners went by. It was super fun.
Cool.
Yeah, and we had the cotton candy machine out then too. So we had a guy from Poe's Tavern who dresses up as Poe, and he was walking around handing people cotton candy. So fun. But
That's great. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Reese or Jacob, anything more before we wrap up?
No, thank you, Jacob, for getting online with us today and talking all things 24 hours in track racing. I learned a lot today about like the niche within a niche of ultra running, which is beautiful. I think we have much to learn about every aspect of the sport. So thank you for opening up your wisdom. Yeah, and it's been great coaching with you and just building a relationship with you, seeing you at Tunnel Hill running. And yeah, so it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
absolutely. And if anyone has any questions or anything, I'm a message away. Or if you're interested in any coaching or anything, get in contact with Ornery Mule. Got a whole group of very good coaches. So
Nice. Thank you. It was great chatting with both of you, and good luck at the Raven.
absolutely. Thank you. And hope to see you there.
Yes, for sure. That's my hope. All right,
Yes.
bye.